Hi, this is Gayle with Bernina of Naperville, and we have been doing a thing for a few months now, monthly, called Clothing Club. And Clothing Club is really like a big clothing sewing enthusiasts meetup. And I've been trying to give little presentations, little tips and tricks about prepping your fabric before you cut it out, how to cut it out, how to find the right pattern for the right fabric, and all of these things. And it's just kind of come to my attention that maybe we should do something where those folks that come to Clothing Club are actually leading the show. So maybe a little 20-minute overall on how to use this foot to make a buttonhole, how to do this, but then let everybody else be led by each other, because there are experienced folks who have made all kinds of garments. They sew something for themselves every day, whereas there are folks just getting into sewing for the very first time. Secondly, there's also a lot of quilters who have been doing quilting. They started off sort of making garments, but they've been doing quilting for a long time, and they want to get back into apparel. So the Clothing Club is what is for all of these people. But why you're watching a video right now is I wanted to kind of consolidate what we've talked about for the past, I guess, 5 months or so. So you can read about it on our store's blog, or you can follow this video and click the things in the link in the description of this YouTube video. I also have this video embedded in our website because our blog is solely about Clothing Club and Sewing Lab. That's right. I mentioned Sewing Lab. Well, Sewing Lab is now like a little companion to Clothing Club. We don't always have time to sew in Clothing Club. There's a lot of people, there's a lot of chatter and whatever. So Sewing Lab is something that you can sign up for and you can work on your sewing projects, and I will be there to help and assist you. And if you need a serger and you don't have one and you just need to finish off some seams, well, we have machines available in our classroom. Or if you have a machine and you just really need help adjusting the stitch width and length and you just need a little tutoring on it, well, you can bring that in during our Sewing Lab hours. So check out our BERNINA of Naperville event calendar and see if there's a Sewing Lab or a Clothing Club that suits your needs. And I'm working from the classic shirt by Liesl Company. And I like this blouse because it's got a collar with a stand, a placket, it buttons up, it's got plackets for the sleeves, it's got pretty cool cuffs, it's got a yoke in the back, and we make a dart and some pleats. So I think that this is a really good teaching tool for doing general construction for blouse techniques that can take you into making all sorts of things. Men's dress shirts, dress shirts for ladies, and other gentlemen and anybody else really interested in wearing something like that. So it also is going to teach you how to sew buttonholes on by your machine and sew the buttons on by machine. So we're excited to get started with this. So I made a little video about how to cut out something that's striped. So let's take a moment and watch that.
So here's the pattern that I thought would work quite well for our classic shirt or basic blouse sew along. So this is the Liesl Company women's pattern classic shirt. I'm going to be cutting a size 8 with a B cup. But the nice thing about these patterns is not only do they give you different sizes, but you can pick your cup size as well. There's also a pattern that is a men's version if you would rather make that. I sometimes like making a men's shirt because it's a little bit baggier and you can wear it over things and whatever. But in general, these patterns go together about the same, whether it's the woman's or the man's. The only thing with the women's is that there are darts and things like that. So let's turn this over, and there are two views on this. View A is basic little flat pockets, while view B has these more cargo pockets on it. But what's interesting about this, it gives us an opportunity to learn some different construction techniques. For instance, the cuff placket is a little bit unique to some of the other shirts that I've made. And also what I like about this is they give you a collar facing and an outside collar piece. So the collar facing is going to be a little bit smaller. So as I said, I've made this blouse before. It was based off of my pineapple blouse. And I did that with a contrasting under collar and things like that. But these were all the pieces that I've already cut out. So this is the collar and the collar stand. And then we have the outer cuff. And then this is the inner facing for the collar. And what happens with the facing is it's going to be just a little smaller so that collar will be nice and curled over in the shirt. We'll see that after I cut this out. But then we've got two cuffs. The cuffs are the same. The inside of the sleeve cuff is going to be just a little bit smaller, the lining of it, than the outer cuff. And then we have the back piece with the little pleats here to give it a little bit more room in the back there. And then we have the front with just one bust dart there and placement line for the pocket. And then we have a yoke here. And we have the placket, the flat pocket, because I'm making view A. And then there's our little funny piece for our placket on our cuffs and our sleeves. Now, I thought I would make it a fun experience by using this stripe fabric. And for most of the blouse, I will cut the pattern so that the stripes run this way. But when I cut the yoke, and there's two pieces, there's the inside and the outside of the shirt, I'm going to cut it this direction. Honestly, it's simply because I don't want to have to match the stripes, and this will give interesting dimension, I think. And I also will be cutting my pocket so it runs horizontally instead. So, hey, I meant to do that, right? And then this time, I usually pick my buttons at the end, but we happen to have these like wooden buttons that I think look pretty good with this. It kind of has that 70s vibe. So I have some other presentation decks that we've talked about with Clothing Club. And I want you, if you did not come to those sessions or whatever, you're just joining us, please make sure you check those out in our blog because I have included like preparation and washing instructions and best practices for preparing your pattern tissue and all of that stuff. So I'm not going to go through cutting everything out. I'm going to do that off camera, but I just wanted to make sure that you go check those guys out. And then I am somebody that clips in. So I'm going to take my little sharp scissors and make my little notches here and here. And that's it. And now let's have a look. And now that stripe is in the middle. Now that my stripe is in the middle like this and my notches are cut, I can put this aside. Now, in our next scenario, I want to cut my shirt front exactly the same for both fronts, right? And I've already kind of lined everything up by the way that I folded it. So now let's have a look at our shirt. What I've done here is this is my center line right here on my pattern piece. So I want to move it so that it's centered right down the middle of one of these maroon stripes, just like this. And one of these pattern pieces needs to be cut, and it's the right side, needs to be cut an inch away from the edge here so that we can put our placket on, right? But what I like to do is just cut them both out together, knowing that I'm aligning everything right in the center. So back go the pattern weights, and I'm going to cut with my rotary cutter, just making sure everything is nice and straight. And then this is something that I can use to cut my placket. Just make sure got everything cut here. Perfect. And I've got some little spots to mark with my scissors here. The dart. And then I have a different way that I'm going to mark the dart. So hang on to that. We'll talk about that when we do our blouse front. Right now, we're just wanting to get the blouse cut appropriately. Perfect. Okay. So now this that's on top is the left side of the blouse. So this one does not get cut. This is the right side of the blouse, and this gets cut an inch away from the edge. And I can do that using my pattern tissue or obviously one of my rotary cutter rulers. So now our next big piece, which is the sleeve, can just go into position here like this. I use my pattern weights to hold everything down. And before I cut, I just want to make sure that I'm lining the sleeve up down one of the stripes. Now you could choose the teal stripe or you could choose the maroon. I'm going for the maroon. So here are the pieces that I have left. And as far as collar pieces and collar stand, I'm going to match those on a stripe, no problem, right? This one we don't have to worry too much about. I'm not going to care too much about lining everything up. I'm even thinking about maybe using a different color for the placket, but I'll cut my stripe for right now. There's my yoke, my pocket, and my cuffs. My cuffs, remember, my cuffs, my pocket, and my yokes, I'm going to cut horizontal this way. These I'm going to cut later. Okay, so these are some scraps left over from cutting out the body of the shirt. And I just wanted to see if I had enough of anything before I cut into more yardage. Here we go. So I'm going to line my stripes up so they're perfect on top of each other. And now let's get down to the nitty-gritty here. So this is what I have left over. I don't need nearly this much fabric, but what I want to talk to you about is layout. I've got this piece that I can decide, do I want it to go stripy like this or straight? And because this is kind of contrasty and I don't want to have to match patterns and all of that good stuff, I'm actually going to cut this one so that the stripes go this direction. For my collar, I'm fine. This is the collar stand. I'm fine cutting that on fold in the middle of a print. No problem there. And then the same with this one in the middle of a print and this one in the middle of a print. Now, here's something to remember. This is going to be my collar outside, which I want to have interfacing with. So that's going to stay over there. This is my collar stand, and one of these needs to have interfacing. Okay. This doesn't call for interfacing, so that can be right here. And then this is my cuff. Now, I do have to be honest with you. I cut my cuffs on fold, even though, because I'm not good at repeatable action there, right? So what I'm going to do is have one of these I'm going to cut two of these, right? So that it's lined up on a stripe like this. And then I'm going to cut two of my inside cuff exactly the same way. So this one is interfaced. This one is not. So this is going to be my non-interface pieces. I'm going to go ahead and cut. Okay, so I've cut everything and I've got it neatly organized here. The last pieces that remain are my pieces that I blocked. So blocking is when you take your interfacing and you iron it onto a large piece from which you will cut afterwards. So just like I lined up the shirt, body and front, I'm lining this piece up to here like so. This is my cuff, and of course, I'm going to cut two cuffs, right? Because I've got two arms. And now we're going to just take this piece and line it up. Some of these small pieces, like I mentioned, I like to pin. Right, let's sew something together now. So let's get to our part of our blouse that we're going to focus on in this video. So after we've cut and all of that stuff, we are going to make a collar with a stand. So this is how I start my collars with a stand, just so you can kind of see here. This is all assembled, but we haven't put it on the blouse yet because we haven't sewn that part of the blouse at this time. So this is made up of several different pattern pieces. And I think I mentioned this earlier, but in this particular pattern, we not only have a pattern piece for the outside part of the collar, which is this part here, but we also have a separate pattern piece for the inside or the under piece part of the collar here. And the reason why there are two separate pattern pieces is because this one is just a wee bit smaller than this one, so that when it's turned inside out, the all of the turning and everything, the seam is just kind of hidden under the collar. Now, this is the stand pattern piece here, and I cut two of these, and I have interfaced one of the collar stands, and I interfaced the outer part of the collar here. And I like Sure-Tailor interfacing for my cuffs and collars, so that's what I used in this application. So I've cut my notches, I've cut everything out, and we're ready to stitch now that we have cut the notches and all of that good stuff, right? So the first thing that I want to do is sew my collar together. So we're going to be sewing this piece to this piece. And what's nice about this, I can kind of use my little stripes to line everything up nicely. But we're going to start by matching the middle. And we're going to leave this part down here open. And then when I'm pinning this part of the collar together, you'll notice that there's just a little bit more of one piece than the other. Don't worry, we're going to stitch this by easing. And all easing is doing is we're pulling just slightly as we're sewing, and that's where that collar is going to form very nicely around that seam. Easing is technically where you're going to take more fabric and put it into a smaller area. And I talked about how that facing of the collar is actually cut a little bit smaller. So that means we're going to be stretching that facing to fit the outer collar so that it'll curl under nicely. And now one of the things that I want to do is I want to stitch this with my non-interfaced piece on the top because that's the side that needs to stretch and that it's just going to work really nicely for us when we stitch. So today I'm using a Bernina 990, and the 990 is the top of the line Bernina, and it takes different feet. So we can use standard 9mm feet on this machine, but this machine has coated feet, and this is where it's telling the machine that it's okay to do a 9mm wide stitch width. It doesn't really matter in this application because we're just doing a straight stitch. But later, when I do my top stitching, which you can see here, I'm going to be using a number 10 foot. And Bernina numbers their feet. So you can see here, this says number 10, and this is a 10D. And this is going to work not only as a 9mm wide stitch capability, but also as a dual feed foot. So when I use this foot, I'm going to engage my dual feed. But what I use this for is to stitch along the edge, and I'll move my needle position over. So as I align that edge along there, it'll allow me to do perfect top stitching. And so we're going to need this. Now, I also have a nice kind of 50 weight thread. There's actually this wonderfully delicious red orange color in my fabric here, and I want to bring that out. So I'm using this for my assembly, and I have a bobbin wound of the same. This is actually the perfect quilting thread from OESD, but it makes for fantastic apparel thread as well. So let's go over to the machine and start stitching.
Okay, so I have my number 1 foot on and my machine, I'm threading up with that red thread. And now, like I mentioned, we're going to place this together. And I'm using a special stitch. All of the Berninas have the stitch, at least if you have a Bernina in the past 20 years. It's stitch number 5. And what stitch number 5 is going to do, and we're using a 1/2 inch seam allowance with these patterns, and my 1/2 inch is just there, like this. And then when this stitches, it's going to sew 5 stitches forward and then go 5 stitches backwards, and that's automatically knotting. Now, as I get to the edge, I'm going to remove my pin, and if this is a 1/2 inch right here to here, then I need to stop a 1/2 inch from here to here. So I'm going to check this, and that I need one more stitch. Now, another thing I want to show you while we're here. I've just got a little bit of cording here. This is like a 12 weight thread. What I'm going to do is raise my presser foot, and I'm going to slip this just in front of my needle right here because I have to take one more stitch, right? So I'm just going to slip this through just like that, and we're going to take one more stitch. Perfect. Now I'm going to lift my foot. We're going to spin this around. We're going to take our thread. It's in between these two layers. And now I'm going to pull this out of the neck opening here. And now I'm going to take the rest of my stitches. And now I'm going to cut another piece of cord for the other end and do the same thing. Okay, I've got about another stitch there. So now I'm gonna raise my presser foot and lift this here. And take my one stitch, lift the presser foot, and turn it away like this. And now I press my quick reverse button, and now it's going to go backwards, forwards, and stop.
So I've stitched my collar, and you can see those little cords there. Whenever I'm making a collar or something like this, I trim my seam allowance down. I cut a little corner like this so it'll turn nicely. Same thing on this side. Be careful not to actually cut your stitching. And then there's a little bit of a curve to this. So after I make my initial trim, I'm going to cut into this piece so I can turn it inside out and it'll lay flat. And then sometimes on our corner, I like to cut a little bit extra off there. So now we're going to clip without cutting these threads in so our collar will lie flat on those pieces that are on a curve. Okay. So now the reason why I put that cording in there is because now I have a little handle that can pull out that collar. And then I can do the same thing on this side, like so. And then we can pull the cords out. Once we use them, we don't need them anymore. Okay, so now I'm going to go to the iron and I'm going to press this back. And because the inside of this collar is smaller, I'm going to be able to totally hide any of the lining peeking through to the other side. So I like to press this with there's a couple ways that you can do this. I'm kind of a little fussy, so I'll end up pressing with my collar open like this so I can get everything as flat as possible there like that, right? Just press it over like so. Then once that's done, that helps this guy be able to be pressed nice and flat. And we can finish up over here and we'll do the same thing here. And now sometimes you may want to use a little piece like this. This is a clapper. Use that to, kind of smack your little pieces into position, but they can also be used if you need some extra pressing assistance in areas like this on bags and collars and things. But because we did that little trick with the cording, we have this really cool corner on both sides. So this pressed out really, really nicely. So now I'm going to use my number 10 D foot here, the one I talked about, and we're just going to stitch. We're going to move our needle position about 3 clicks to the left, and we're going to follow that stitching a straight stitch. So let's have a stitch. Now, it's important when using a dual feed foot that you pull the dual feed mechanism from the back. And then I'm moving my needle position on my stitch number 1. I'm changing from stitch 5 to stitch number 1 because we don't need to back tack on this one. And now I'm moving my needle position 3 clicks to the left. And now I'm going to stitch. And sometimes I like to elongate my stitch length. So I'm going to do it at 3 millimeters because elongating with a little bit heavier thread and top stitching makes for a nice presentation. Now, once we have this part of our collar assembled, it's time to attach our collar stand. Now, we're going to take the collar stand that doesn't have any interfacing on it, and I'm going to fold this up 1/2 inch, and I can use my hot hammer to help me do that. So a hot hammer is a ruler like this. I've used it in a couple videos, and it allows me to measure up 1/2 inch. That's a 1/2 inch right there. So I'm going to take that edge, that raw edge, and press it just like that. And then this is where you could use a clapper to kind of keep it on there while it cools to get a nice creased edge. And then you can use the shorter part of the ruler when we're going around this little curvy edge like so. We're just trying to ease that in like that. Just make sure that there aren't any puckers in it. And now we'll do the other side. And even if you needed here, you could put your little clapper on there and let it cool off a little bit. So now that we have this piece prepped and this piece, we want, this is the outside part of our collar, and this is the outside part of our collar. So we want to line this up like so, matching our notches and matching our centers. So we're going to pin. Once we get everything aligned with our notches and all of those good things, so we're going to pin it, and then we're going to add this piece into place. And I just repin. Okay, so now we're going to stitch. I'm just going to switch out my foot here, move my needle position back to center, and now we're still using 1/2 inch seam allowance. And we can go back to our number 5 stitch if you wanted. And now we're going to stitch and just take it really slow around this curve. And sometimes I like a little stiletto to hold things down nice and flat because we're still easing this area in just a little bit. Now, just the same as before, I'm going to trim my seam allowance down and clip my curves where I need to. And now we're going to turn this inside out, and we will top stitch this, but after it goes onto our blouse. And I did my best to line up this collar as much as possible. It's always better on one side than the other, but it looks pretty good to me. So after a little pressing, you can see kind of how it's going to look once it gets sewn onto our shirt. So I'm just going to pick, when I make my shirt, which one I like better. They're both pretty identical, but one I had kind of lined up a little bit better than the other, but nonetheless. So this is the one I made before, and now this is the one we finished. All right, so a cuff is very similar, except a cuff we're not going to do any top stitching. So this is much like doing our collar stand, which was this part of our collar, because the top stitching doesn't come into play until it's attached to the bottom of the sleeve, which we'll do in another video. But much like our collar, we have the cuff facing and we have the sleeve cuff. And so the cuff facing does not have any interfacing, but the outer cuff does. You can see it there. So then what you want to do is fold this piece up, and you can see how I did it here. So I'm just going to use that hot hammer and press this up. Once we press that up like this, we're going to place this into position like so, and we're going to ease it as we pin it, just like we did our collar and stand. All right, and don't forget 1/2 inch seam allowances. And I'm using that same number 5 hacking stitch. And then once again, we're going to trim and press. So there's one and the other.
All right, now that we have our cuffs and collars, we're ready to dance at Chippendales, right? Okay, maybe not. But now, the next time you see me, we're gonna do the yoke, and we're gonna attach that to the back of the blouse. We're gonna do a pleat. We're gonna attach the shoulders with a special little hot dog technique that I like to use, and we're gonna make darts. So join us back here, and please, if you can make it in person to Clothing Club or to the Sewing Lab, make sure you check those things out at BERNINAofNaperville.com. You can just scroll to the bottom of our homepage and you'll see our blog, and any of our blog articles are going to link to Clothing Club and Sewing Lab. So I really hope that you'll join us. We also Zoom you in if you're not near the Bernina of Naperville area. And we try our best for those of you on Zoom, but sometimes, you know, the equipment doesn't cooperate and everything, so just bear with us. But I really like to thank all of you for your support and your enthusiasm for making clothes, because, hey, I think that's where a lot of us really wanted to start learning to sew, and then, you know, getting them to fit, and, you know, the construction techniques and all of those things just got in our way, and we didn't have a good time. So hopefully Clothing Club, these videos, and Sewing Lab is a good support system for you if you want to make clothes. So thank you so much. And if you want to see other tutorials or other videos, don't forget to check out our Bernina of Naperville YouTube channel. It's easy. It's youtube.com/Bernina of Naperville. And there you can like, comment, and subscribe. And don't forget to tag us on social media at Bernina of Naperville if you want to show off your beautiful creations. All right, I'll see you later. Bye.